I am Liz Powell. I'm the founder and head of G2G Consulting, which stands for Government to Growth. And we do this quarterly series where we come together with the two Chris's to talk about what's going on in politics and government and the economy right now and how it's impacting all of us. So why don't we start off with introductions? I'll pass to you, Chris Campbell.
Hey, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm Chris Campbell. I worked on Capitol Hill for too long, and then was confirmed as Assistant Secretary of Treasury in the first Trump administration. I did that for some time, left, and now I work in finance, where I do strategic advising for large funds, families, and hyper growth or kind of unicorn companies growing in regulated spaces.
Great. Chris Oates.
I am Chris Oates. I did not work on Capitol Hill, which I'm now happy every time I talk to someone who has worked on Capitol Hill. But I have been working as an analyst of U.S. politics for over a decade as a political risk consultant, and that generally involves not what I think about the news, what I want to have happen, but what are the forecasts? How can we know what is likely or unlikely to happen? What are the signals to help get us there? I've also worked on campaigns in the U.S. I worked on a ballot question in 2020 that lost by 11 points. Without the pandemic, we probably only would have lost by 5. And I now run an information platform that is for policy information, both at the congressional, the state, and the municipal level.
Great. And I forgot to mention, I used to work on the Hill as well. And now I'm a lobbyist. We work with a lot of different companies and nonprofits. So let's start off with there's been some things happening. So we'll start off on a little bit more of a somber note. So obviously we've had some shootings and this big debate about freedom of speech. So we just had the Dallas ICE facility shooting. Unfortunately, one has been killed, 2 are injured, and they found messages that are anti-ICE in nature with the bullet round. So they're still investigating that. We obviously had the Charlie Cook shooting, and then the recent service. We also had the Minnesota legislator and her husband shot as well. So we've had both sides of all sides of the spectrum, I guess, of politics impacted by that. And then last night, Jimmy Kimmel came back. I'm sure many people watched that. Stephen Colbert had his show canceled. So I'm starting off with what is going on with this freedom of speech issue, and then this intense this violence that's happening that I think everyone opposes. So would love to just hear both of your perspectives on what you think is going on and where you see sort of the future of the parties in response to this. And we'll start with you, Chris Campbell.
Yeah, first, listen, as I'm sure everyone, our hearts and prayers go out to certainly the people, the tragic victims of today's shooting. I think, as you said, Liz, one thing we can all agree upon is that political violence, there is no room for political violence in our system. We must be able to find a way to talk together, because candidly, there is no democracy without dialogue. And so, if we can't talk, there's the American experiment's over. And so we have to find a way to lower the temperature and get to a place where we can actually have civil dialogues. As a kind of lifelong Republican, but certainly a more moderate one, it's challenging, I think, at times like this to I think it's very important to approach this in several ways. Certainly everyone has to decry political violence, and we all should, and we don't, and many of us do, not everyone, unfortunately. But I think that it's also important to recognize how we got here and to diagnose the challenge and the problem. And so therefore we can actually change things to make a different, make things different prospectively. Because if we can sing Kumbaya and we can all come together and pray and hope that these things don't happen again. But unless we change actions, rhetoric, and conversation, they're not going to be meaningful changes. And so I think with both of those things having to happen at the same time, I think there perhaps is a path forward. But there is, the rhetoric I would consider on the left has been just outlandishly amazing. You have the entirety of the entire Democratic Party going after President Trump, trying to do everything they could to put him in prison. And then and you know, which candidly only made him stronger. And then he tried to get, was almost assassinated twice, right? You have Charlie Kirk, and I understand this is happening on both sides, but you know, today is another evidence. I think we'll find that the rhetoric on the left has reached such a boiling point that is forcing people to do things that probably wouldn't maybe not otherwise do. And then look, I recognize that there are also people who have significant mental challenge in those kind of issues. But I mean, from all evidence suggests, at least the Charlie Kirk assassin, you know, this was a person who was recently radicalized, grew up in a really seemed to be a very normal family, very middle class. And so there is just there we actually have to, as collectively as a society, recognize the challenges, but take responsibility for what we say and our own actions. And that includes what we talk about and how we characterize people that we disagree with.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different approach because one thing that's annoyed me about the last couple of weeks is everyone's like, we have to decry political violence, which is true. But like 99.99999% of us are not violent. So the question is, what leads a kid in Utah or a kid in Butler, Pennsylvania, to try to shoot someone? What leads someone in that? And that is, yes, it's in part maybe about the political rhetoric, but a lot of it is about radicalization online and access to guns. And we don't ever want to talk about that in our country. And I think part of it is because political pundits and people who work on Capitol Hill are not steeped in online like radicalized space. It's a very big blind spot for us. Even to the fact that there was a school shooting the same day as the Charlie Kirk, and that was that kid was seemingly radically radicalized online. So there's a big blind spot about like what is driving the very statistically very small chances of violence, but that are still there, and that's not just political, but is also school shootings, mass shootings, and the other thing. And then I think there are the other things to talk about, which is what is our reaction to it. And why was it that you mentioned free speech? You say, I mean, people say we have to turn down the rhetoric, but when President Trump just today said, "Why is Jimmy Kimmel back on air? Last time we got 16 million from ABC. This time we're going to go get more." Like, it's completely reasonable for Democrats to say that is the action of an authoritarian president. And it's completely reasonable for Republicans in 2021 to say Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan is catastrophic. I think when we talk about politics, they're high stakes events and we should be passionate about them. And Democrats should be saying that what they believe, and Republicans should be saying what they believe. And it is very difficult because if you care about something that could lead to the deaths of, say, thousands of people, like the Medicaid cuts or USAID cuts, I mean, to say, oh, well, you should be passionate about it, but also realize there are people out there with mental health problems that might take it too far. I think it's asking us to be a little bit have more control over what we say than what we can. And I think the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination was a good example of that, where I saw people on the right say, the left is celebrating this, Blue Sky is celebrating this. And if you look at the actual accounts that are doing that, it's people with a few hundred followers. It's very small. No one with actual no one with actual real clout in the Democratic Party or on the left. And I think one of the things that is different now than it used to be is that those types of people now have an ability to put their opinions out for everyone to see and everyone to kind of cherry pick. Because I can guarantee you, when President Kennedy was assassinated, I'm sure people were making jokes about it. When President Reagan was shot, I'm sure people were making jokes about it. But it's no longer the drunk at the end of the bar making an inappropriate joke after a tragedy. It's someone puts it on Twitter and everyone can see and we can distort it. And I think that's what, it's very difficult to get a sense of, what is the statistical significance of dangerous rhetoric from any one side and how much does that translate into violence when we're all dealing in kind of anecdotes and cherry picked and whatever Elon Musk has just tweeted. So I absolutely agree with what Chris says is that we do need to turn down the political rhetoric, but I think we also need to recognize there is a limit to what Chuck Schumer can do. If you are saying we are still going to have politics, we're still going to have disagreements, we're still going to argue with each other. To do that, we still need to have that. But also, if people get into an argument in DC about a policy, that's probably not to blame for some random person in a small town who gets radicalized on 4chan. So I think there's a lot of different problems going on. And I think one of the problems that we have today is that our political environment is, as I heard someone say, the average pundit, his brain has billions of neurons, but can only hold one idea at a time. And I think we do need to get to a point where we can hold multiple ideas at a time in a head. So completely agree with what Chris says, but I think it's also important to recognize our own limitations of what we can control.
Yeah, let me just jump in here quickly. I'll try. I'm gonna do. Intentionally decided to go in this conversation to be very. I want to be productive as best I can, and I worked. As most people know, I worked for Orrin Hatch for 9 million years. And Orrin was, just was a political mentor of mine for so long and for so many years. And I led his office for a long time. And I tell you one thing that is true, and that is that if any member of our staff would have called a Democrat a communist or a fascist, that would have been the last day that person was on staff. It is every member of Congress. It is every one of us, all Americans, to decide how we characterize our enemies and think about when you characterize them, how are they going to respond? Right? Does that bring them to the table? Does that open a dialogue? Or does it close off dialogue? And as Charlie Kirk said, when we stop talking, that's when really bad things start happening. And so we're going to see this over and over and over again until all of us take personal responsibility for our own actions and the way that we characterize our fellow Americans. That is a real problem, and it is incumbent upon all of us. Yes, technology is a huge issue, and it does amplify really, really negative issues. And the technology platforms, I think, should have some responsibility for allowing those really radicalized ideas to be amplified. But it doesn't matter, because if there is no radical conversation to have, because all of us view us, all of us as Americans, and this is a grand American experiment where we're going to disagree. We need to disagree in a way that it's not going to cause a lot of challenges. That's my fervent hope and my fervent message of, because I'm going to tell you, I said this in this platform, in this conversation, we are the longest standing democracy the world has ever known. Democracy always fails. Always. It has always failed. And every day we wake up, we have to decide as Americans to lean into a democracy and lead into a dialogue. If we don't, this is not going to work. And so I just implore everyone to be able to, as I said before, just view the people who you disagree with as their ideas. They're not stupid. They're not idiots. They don't need to be educated. They just have different views, and embrace them as Americans, embrace them as neighbors, and start and have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I think we all agree with that. And that's partly what we like to do with these quarterly sessions, is to have these different views come together. I do think it's really interesting and scary. I mean, as a parent, what's going on the internet, there's so much I don't know. And I think, Chris Oates, you pointed out, there's a lot happening on the internet that is for that 1%, that really small percentage that could be radicalized or whatever you want to call it, and then turn violent. Like, there's the whole part of the internet I don't think, like you said, members of Congress know about. I certainly don't know about. I mean, so I think that there's something there. And then Chris Campbell, you were talking about like holding these platforms, these technologies accountable. I think that is, these are themes to me that I think most people would agree with. So let's hope. But then obviously we all, talk and treat each other like human beings, because that we are human beings. We're Americans first. So I love that. So just want to chime in with that. But we can move on to some other interesting things that have been happening. Russia. So Trump made an abrupt change in stature on this, and is now siding with Ukraine in the effort to retake all of its territory. So what do we think is going on with the whole Russia, Ukraine, Trump, Putin situation? And this time, would love to start with you, Chris Oates.
Absolutely no idea. No idea. He could go back in an instant. I think what is really interesting here is not what Trump has said recently, but the fact that he is changing his mind so fast. Because what that shows to me is that there really isn't, in the State Department or in the National Security Council, a real idea of what the U.S. interest is in the conflict, other than to just hope that it goes away. I think during the Biden administration, certainly in the first couple of years, there was a real bipartisan support for Ukraine to deliver them the weapons that they needed to defend themselves. We can argue about whether they should have had more weapons with more funding with fewer restrictions. But you basically had a sense from Mitch McConnell to Joe Biden, Marco Rubio to JD Vance, at least initially, that Ukraine was on our side, Russia was on their side, and we should take as many actions as we could to prevent an interstate conflict from succeeding. Kind of similar to the first Gulf War. And what I think is really interesting now is that, and with the aggressor to have lost, what I think really is interesting now is that Trump is very focused on ending the conflict, but without really a sense of what does that mean, which is why the Russia summit in Alaska was seen as a catastrophe by so many Europeans that they had to immediately fly to Washington. And then the Washington meeting, even though that was the other side of the conflict, was seen as this big success. And you've kind of gone back and forth. So I think ultimately, I don't think the US right now has a real strong stance on what should happen with Ukraine, Russia. And you can have a foreign policy in a war that changes every like couple weeks. But what I think is really interesting is that might not matter because Europe does seem to be stepping up a little bit. But more importantly, it does seem as if Ukraine is now able to defend itself with much fewer American tools. And that's not necessarily because they're all amazing fighters, although Ukraine is fighting well. But the Ukrainian defense industrial complex is now scaling up rapidly with the advance of drones. Drone technology has taken off so much faster than we ever thought it would 5 years ago, to the extent that I believe either today or yesterday they were hitting oil depots. And so if Kamala Harris had won, the question would have been, would there have been enough support to continue to support Ukraine until the Russian economy starts to collapse and Vladimir Putin feels some pressure to go? I think what we're seeing now is, even though Harris didn't win, Trump did, and the funding has decreased, it may be that domestic drone production in Ukraine is filling that gap. So it's not to say that it's completely over, but it does mean that it's a little bit more complicated, and that the U.S. may not simply matter as much. So going forward, it may not be the case that like Trump is going to sell out Ukraine. It may be that he tries to, maybe that he supports them, but ultimately it comes down to a lot of little robots flying over eastern Ukraine. And if they were able to blow up enough Russian tanks to make Vladimir Putin start to come to the table in a way that he hasn't been for the first few years of the conflict.
Yeah, just correct a couple of inaccuracies. So yes, U.S. direct investment in the war has diminished. What has happened though is Europeans are actually now spending more money, budgeting more of their GDP toward defense, and they're now buying American missiles and American ammunition and sending it to Ukraine. So it's not us U.S. taxpayers bearing the burden of funding and arming Ukrainians. It's the Europeans who are in direct conflict and direct challenge to the Ukrainian or with this Russia-Ukraine war. There is the other issue is, candidly, I think you just have to listen to the president in his speech with Charlie Kirk's memorial, and suggesting that he is, having worked for him, I can tell you, he likes the people he likes, and if you like him, if he gets along with you, he likes you. If not, then he doesn't like you. He, for whatever reason, his own reasoning, he had an interpretation of a relationship that he had with President Putin that I think turns out to not be accurate. I think he's now evolving quickly to a place where he's realizing that the way that he believed, or that his relationship he had with Putin was not accurate, and has dramatically changed his position and dramatically changed his approach to this. What I can tell you is the administration is looking at a series of very, very difficult challenges that will put the Russian economy in an extreme pressure. And we'll just have to see what goes on. But there are going to be significant tariffs, contemplation of significant tariffs and secondary tariffs, and then additional sanctions on that. And then as the president mentioned in his UN address, the Europeans must immediately stop paying for their own war and stop arming Russians giving Russian money through their purchase of oil and natural gas, Russian oil and natural gas to fund their enemies. So all of those things are happening simultaneously. They're happening today. I think that very, very soon, the White House will make some announcements on this, and I think that we'll see where the war goes. I mean, Russia will be put in a really significant challenge and significant box. Putin is he is an authoritarian leader, and he's he can when pushed. We'll see where he goes on this. But it's going to be significant. I think it could be really crushing to the economy, and it could happen very quickly. So we'll see how it goes, and I hope for the peace and security of all of us. I think that I'm certainly hopeful that it'll be a quick and speedy resolution of this. And one more thing on color on this is that for whatever it is, for whatever reason, you can disagree with it or like it or not like it. I just think that the president sees the Russia-Ukraine war as not America's war. He sees them as killing each other, but sees a role for the United States to try to find a way to get an exit ramp here. And so I think that he's going to now take that exit ramp, in my opinion, finally, and put Russia under significant challenge and force them to make some very, very difficult decisions.
You mentioned tariffs, so can you catch us up with the latest on tariffs? And then I was seeing that Wall Street is now buying tariff refunds because they're betting that the Supreme Court's going to strike it down. So can you sort of clarify all that for us?
Yeah, so there is so you can go geeky here if not. So there's the president, as everyone knows, the president started levying significantly high tariffs on up to 100%, sometimes even more than 100% on some countries that have been doing business with or trading with the United States for a long time. And he gave a famous press conference where he kind of like equalized the tariff policy around the world, and and the administration has unilaterally raised these tariffs without the approval of Congress. The rub is that the challenge is that Congress has a unique and per the Constitution has the sole power of the purse strings, and they are the only body who can impose taxes effectively on even people both foreign and domestic. And so Congress can raise or lower a tariff, Congress can raise or lower a tax, Congress can raise or lower spending. The administration then, based on Congress's authorization, can then interpret what the Congress did and do so in a way that's it's kind of locked down, but has some authority to be able to interpret Congress's will. Congress has not given the administration, any administration, a wide breadth of tariff policy to be able to raise or lower tariffs. However, there are significant aspects in the Constitution where the president can act on the national security interests of a country to be able to do things in a way, even economically, that allow him to be able to have some extraterritorial powers that would perhaps bypass Congress in these issues. And those are the conversation that's now currently at the Supreme Court. And that, does the president have the power to raise and lower these tariffs? Is that power vested in Congress? And the president has to wait for Congress to act. Candidly, it depends on where the Supreme Court lands on one of those two issues I just talked about. Based on recent decisions, I would suggest probably that they're gonna if not fully, slightly find the president's imposition of tariffs is legal, as constitutional. But as Liz suggested, my amazing friends on Wall Street have a betting pool, effectively suggesting that there certainly would be a market for it, and some financial interest in if the Supreme Court would reverse course the US government would have to give back trillions of dollars to companies and foreign governments that they've imposed tariffs. And so it's a very, very important decision. The president is, I can tell you, he loves tariffs. He absolutely sees them as probably his best negotiating tool. And so we'll see where it goes. I have no idea. I guess if I were to flip a coin, I probably would say it would, and heads were to Trump were to win, I would probably say 2 out of 3 times it would go heads. But there is that one time it could go tails. So I don't know.
Interesting. Chris, if you want to talk on tariffs, if not, I got a question for you. So
Just briefly on tariffs, I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers have a pretty bad track record of predicting what the Supreme Court is going to do for the past like 10 years. I mean, ever since I got started in political risk, it seems like every year there was a legal experts say there's a consensus that this thing is ridiculous, and then the Supreme Court finds for it. Supreme Court makes the laws. They don't really, yes, they officially interpret it, but effectively they get to make up what the law is. And so lower courts have found that Trump doesn't have this power, which would indicate that the Supreme Court is more likely than not to do it because they will more often follow lower courts. But as Justice Jackson wrote in a recent ruling about an administrative stay, this court is working on Calvin Ball rules where there are no rules, but there is one rule, which is that the administration always wins. So the likelihood is that a 6-3 conservative majority will find for the conservative president. The one thing I will say, and you can see this with all their other rulings, the one thing I will say, and just looking at the Supreme Court, they are pretty conservative, but they are as Wall Street as they are MAGA, to put it simply. So it is possible that Roberts and others think that this is something where the business community needs tariffs not to exist, or they need to go through Congress where they're a bit more predictable and they go against the president. But I mean, ultimately, every single time I've tried to predict the Supreme Court, if I've tried to predict it on the basis of what the law is, I'm wrong. And if I try to base it on the prediction of the court is a JV legislature, as Justice Barrett said it isn't, but if you predict that that's the way that they decide, you tend to be more right than not. So just as a pure analyst trying to forecast, I think they're going to go for what the Trump administration wants.
okay, interesting. All right, so we're going to shift to another topic, vaccines and health. So we had RFK Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services, testimony 2 weeks ago. And then last week we had Menares, the former CDC director. And I found it fascinating that Republican leaders, Cassidy and Barrasso, both doctors, were really challenging the secretary. And Cassidy at one point, when it was very tense, really defended Menares for her actions in contacting him as soon as she was fired, and explained this is the role of Congress. This is the committee that does that oversight. And the other thing that's fascinating that people may not realize is right before the RFK Jr. hearing in front of the Senate Finance Committee 2 weeks ago, Republican pollsters did a poll of MAGA Republicans, so not just Republicans, but MAGA specifically, and found 76% support vaccines. Now, if you start carving out COVID, the numbers go down a bit, but generally vaccine support is actually quite strong among MAGA. So what's interesting is that we're seeing more Republicans challenging the changes that are going on or that led by the secretary. So I find that interesting. Want to get your comments on that. And then, of course, most recently this week, we've got the changing guidance, which is contrary to American Academy of Pediatrics, and then now Tylenol causing autism. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on everything going on this topic? And I know it's a lot, but
well, I'll just say that Tylenol causing autism feels like a really bad Mad Libs of politics. If you gave me a year and a lot of psychedelics, I would not have come up with that sentence if I was writing about politics, but in forecasting. But I think there's a few things. One is, you're right, the general public is in favor of vaccines. Polling is pretty clear about that. They are not in favor of what RFK Jr. is doing. You can see that as well, that I think Cassidy and Barrasso know what they should be doing. They know what the right thing is to do. But Cassidy knew that before the confirmation hearing back in, what was it, February. I don't think this was a secret. It's not like RFK has been quiet for his entire career. But the question is, what are they going to do about it? And, yes, RFK Jr. Said at the confirmation hearings everything he wants to say. confirmation hearings nowadays are basically just a ritual of people being confirmed, telling senators what they want to hear, and then they go off and do whatever they want anyway. Um, Sorry if I'm sound jaded, but like, come on, everyone
It
knows.
is usually true, although I will say in this case, as someone who watched all of the confirmation hearings, like for Kennedy, he clearly wasn't willing to say vaccines were safe and effective. When Cassie pushed it on it, all he would say is, if you show me the data. And Cassie's like, but I've been practicing for 40 years. I'm telling you, there's overwhelming data. And still, Kennedy would say, only if you show me the data. So he was hinting that. But anyway, go on.
I think that, yeah, no, you're. I think they often like the really recalcitrant ones won't officially say what they want, but they'll give the senators just enough so that the senators can then say, "Oh, I talked to them." But I mean, the whole confirmation process at the start of the year, I remember it was Joni Ernst clearly did not want Pete Hegseth to be the Secretary of Defense, but she backed down to him. So I think the question is, will they go against the president? Will they go against it? And what are their levers? Because if they're never willing to stand up, at what point do they go into the White House and say, you have to fire Kennedy? But what's the or? Are they going to actually vote down any of Trump's other nominees? Are they going to exert leverage over the budget? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I think that is the point of that's how the legislature exerts leverage over the executive is either through the budget or saying it's going to be a lot harder or you need us or there's political capital that you would have to expend for it. But I don't see where it is. So if I were forecasting, I would say they will be against it. They will be upset about it. They will tell their constituents that they don't support it. But if I had to guess, I would say RFK is still in his job in 6 months' time, and vaccination rates have gone down, and the approval ratings of the Trump administration has gone down. I think this is one of the tough things about analyzing the Trump administration this time. A lot of the things they do are not what a rational actor would do if you're trying to maximize your poll ratings. And yet they happen. And so I think that is likely. And if they were to decide, they would say, well, MAHA is an important segment of the population. We don't want to alienate that. We don't want to lose that. But I think ultimately the Trump administration is going to be underwater on this issue, even more so than it is now over the next 6 months. Senators are going to be caught running away from it, but I think ultimately they're not going to do anything. I would love to be proven wrong as a child who was thankfully vaccinated during the Biden administration. I would love to be proven wrong, but we'll see what happens.
What do you think?
Yeah. So so I have a unique perspective. As many people know, I worked for the administration. Would not be surprising to anyone that we were in conversations for me to rejoin. I'll tell you this. I think Trump, knowing that he's not going to run again, cannot run again. He sees his administration as having 4 years to make significant changes. His thrust and ask for his officials are to come up with ideas that have never been tried before, even if they're bonkers, because the reality is, and again, you may disagree with this, but the United States spends the most amount of money in healthcare, and we have the worst results of any country on the planet. Something has to change. I mean, whatever we're doing is not working, right? So you got to find a different approach to this. One thing I do know about human beings, people hate change. However, if we want different outcomes, we have to think of things in different ways. And so there's no question the president has across the board picked people who are disruptors. No question. That is the entirety of his second administration. The second term is to make significant changes, swing really hard, and try to find ways of really moving, advancing the ball on things that he believes are just common sense. He believes that a country without borders is not a country, right? He believes that if a country is paying the most amount of money in healthcare and has in the OECD has some of the worst results, something is wrong. Something is broken. Who knows what it is, but we got to start changing something, right? And I'll tell you, as Liz knows and Chris knows, as someone who was in DC for a very long time, there are, Liz is unique and she's amazing, but there are a billion Liz Powells that are lobbyists who will get paid a lot of money to buy incumbent interests to not make sure that nothing changes. And we will continue down this path over and over and over again, and just like keep throwing our hands up, like, oh my gosh, we spent all this money. I got to figure this out. We got to try to do Obamacare. Like let's think about Obamacare. Obamacare, we fundamentally changed the healthcare system in our country because 330 million Americans were uninsured by under or uninsured by health insurance. After Obamacare, there are 30 million Americans who are under or uninsured by healthcare insurance. So we literally broke a healthcare system, significantly changed it in a way that now it must receive subsidies for people to afford insurance, and with zero change. It is so incredibly frustrating, right? So someone from the outside, someone who doesn't live in Washington, someone who wants to be able to see the government work for them, what? Ugh, you're right. So the president's like, let's take big swings. Let's make some significant differences and try to really move the needle. Now, you may disagree on his policies. You may disagree on the swings that he's made or the personnel he's put in place. But I candidly, as someone who's like a moderate Republican, like we got to find ways of changing the system. Our education system. Do you see the results of our latest testing? I mean, we're at like 30% proficiency. We spend the most amount of money on education as any OECD country on the planet, and we have the worst results. Something is broken. We have to find a way to change this, and it's going to take Canada's going to take someone like Donald Trump, who just doesn't give two flying whatevers, to really make take these huge swings and try something that hasn't been done before. Because I'm telling you, as every American knows, what we're doing is not working.
Well, Chris, if I can push you on the vaccine part, like I agree, it's important to take big swings, but if I'm going to take a big swing, I'm not going to aim it at my own face. Like this is not a problem that we had vaccine. So why is it that you think he's going with an RFK Jr. who's basically a kook rather than a medical doctor who has a different approach? Like there are ways to be disruptive without, like, you could tell the Secretary of Energy to like blow up some nuclear bombs in the Midwest, but like clearly that's a bad idea. Like where are the guardrails to tell Donald Trump
Chris,
that
I love you.
you
I love you, and
overdo
you're amazing. But I'll tell you one thing: we can pull every doctor in the country and ask them what causes autism, and we get thousands, millions of different answers. Because genuinely, candidly, no one knows.
Well, we know it's not Tylenol, or we're pretty sure
Actually,
it's
you
not
don't know
Tylenol,
that.
and we know that
Chris,
Tylenol has
you don't
significant
know
safety.
that. You're not a doctor. You're not a scientist. You
My
don't.
wife's a doctor. I know this stuff. Trust me. I come from a family of doctors.
All right.
RFK Jr. is going to get people killed. We can move on, but like, let me say this. RFK Jr. is going to get babies killed. And that is not something I find we are like, we'll just agree to disagree. Medical science has solved this, and we got a bunch of idiots trying to wreck it.
The same medical scientists now almost 1 in 20 Americans are going to now be born with autism.
Yeah,
There
my
is
kid
something
is one of them, so I care
significantly
about
wrong.
this. Yeah, we can move on because I'll get too angry. So
Yeah,
let's just
so
move on.
I think it's important that we keep moving forward with discussion. And I just want to say I agree with your point that there are lots of things to disrupt, but why would you disrupt something that's already like set? Like Senator Cassidy's like, it's set, we already know MMR. Like we all need measles, mumps, rubella vaccines, like stuff like that. It's like, why touch that? Swing at the other stuff. So I think that's the point you're trying to make. You're not trying to get into a debate. You're just trying to make that
No,
point.
and I can't, as you heard, I'm not defending the president on this vaccine. What
Okay.
what I am suggesting is Americans, we need to find some ways to really change stuff because we're going down a wrong paths in lots of different ways, in my opinion.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll just add in, so I was recently in an event with several women Republican senators. And what's really interesting is that, and I think it's important, like us three insiders, I think we get this, but for others to understand that a lot of times a member of Congress can agree on something, but the tactically how you execute is very different. So for example, Senator Susan Collins is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. She's like one of the most powerful senators. And she was very clearly talking about how she wants the ACA extension. She absolutely supports it, but there's no way she's shoving it into a continuing resolution, right? So it's the tactics, it's how you do it. Same thing with grants. Julia Letlow is another Republican congresswoman on the House side who I talked to just last week, and she was talking about how she's been pushing back on all the grants that were terminated, especially in women's health, and that she's trying to work with Secretary Kennedy on that. So I think that we're seeing, and also privately, I have conversations with many Republican members who do not think that Kennedy is the right person for Secretary of Health and Human Services. But as Chris Campbell is pointing out, we're in a difficult environment where they may say that, but there's not actually going to be that pushback. So there's a lot going on. And there's also the dynamics now that may be very different a year from now. Like, think about it. Next year, we're going to be in the heat of the elections, and there could be a lot of reasons. There could be things that happen, or polling suddenly goes whack, that finally there is enough to either get Kennedy out or to retract some of the vaccine stuff. Like, anything could happen. And then for people's own elections, that's what they care first and foremost about. So if it's their election, they're going to take stances or do certain things that are going to help their own election. I mean, so as we all saw with Murkowski, with the deal that she made, she was just being a good senator for her constituents. So anyway,
I
another
have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Do you think that, in your opinion, do you think that big changes could happen once primaries are over in terms of how senators are acting towards the administration? That Republican senators get through primaries and then they start pivoting towards general elections?
That's historically what happens. And I think right now they're very nervous. I've had many conversations. They're very nervous about primary challenges and a lot of money getting poured in. Yeah. What do you think, Chris Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen the cycles, right? So I mean, everyone's going to attack right from now until next summer, and then there's an opportunity to do something post June or July next year on some legislating. I will say as well. I mean, there'll be at least one more budget reconciliation process, between now and the midterms. And so we'll kind of see how it goes, but I think that I think that budget reconciliation process will be informed by the politics of the day, whatever it is. I knew that for sure. And so, but I think it's important for the folks, in the audience to know that the administration is going to, obviously, the worst thing that could happen for President Trump, one of the worst things that could happen to President Trump would be for him to lose the House. And so he's not going to want to do something that's going to hasten that. He's going to be very careful about that as much as he can. Overlaying that with what I said before, which is he wants to, and is insisting upon his personnel, make really big swings and take huge swings at things that like eliminating the Department of Education, right? Really big swings. And so he's, so I think that, I think that there's one thing that at least from the White House perspective, is real, and is that they have to, although these ideas maybe have to be big, they have to also kind of pass the common sense test, at least from their perspective. And so I think that, we'll see what goes on. Vaccines may be an outlier there. And there's, I think this is a personal passion that the secretary has, that idea he's had for a very, very, very long time. And was well known. He ran on it as president, run for president on it. But it's, I think it's, other than that, I think it's just, I guess so politics are going to have a significant say what goes on between now and next summer, and there may be a sliver of some more kind of bipartisanship legislating. Although I'm very doubtful.
Yeah, I'm doubtful on that too. But before we close out, I see some questions in the Q&A box, so keep posting them there. So I just want to touch on two more things. So budget and appropriations, the new appropriations year starts October 1, which is very close, and we've got folks in recess. So what do we think is going to happen with CR and shutdown? And then also the Epstein files, that was like huge issue. No one could not escape it. And now with the Arizona Democrat coming in, she can be that final signature to force that. So wanted to just get your takes on both of those issues, and then we'll take the open Q&A, and whichever one of you would like to go first.
Chris, I want Chris to go first.
Okay, on the CR, it looks like there's going to be a shutdown. I mean, I personally think that Jeffries and Schumer have really mishandled this by asking for the healthcare subsidies. I don't think you can have a shutdown over something else. It just looks bad. So I don't know what their strategy is. I don't know if they have a strategy. I would not be surprised if we do have a short shutdown and then the cave with some kind of fudge. But yeah, I think there's a lot of question marks because it is unclear to the extent to which Trump and Republicans in Congress want to shut down, and the extent to which Schumer and Jeffries also want to shut down, what the end game is. So I think that is still ongoing. So it looks like the default would be, if I had to say, the base case is a 2-week shutdown that is ended with some kind of fudge. But I also wouldn't be surprised if this turns into a real fight over to the extent to which the executive branch can keep the government functioning by just saying everyone is emergency, and then they cave. And also, we might have a cave at the last minute, as we did in March. So there's a lot of possibilities, and the kind of the signals right now are more for shutdown, but there's enough that you can say that anything could happen. On the Epstein files, I think that is interesting. I think it's going to come up. It looks like the speaker could try to delay it or kill it in committee. I think this is an ongoing thing, ongoing problem for Trump, because it is, you can't get away from it. Like, people are still going to ask about it. There was a statue in the National Mall today about of Trump and Epstein for Friendship Month. When that birthday book came out, it dominated. So it is one of those things that you can't get away from it, because the underlying fact is that he was friends with a pedophile. And we don't know the extent of their friendship, but if there are files, they either come out, and if they come out with him, it's really bad. If they come out without him, people are going to say, well, he was redacted. That Department of Justice official who was caught on a hinge date in Georgetown saying they're just going to redact the Republicans and leave the Democrats in there. It means that there's enough stuff in the air for a potential conspiracy theories, no matter what happens. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see the Epstein files, but just because he seems like a really bad guy. And yeah, if you ever want to feel bad about humanity, go read that birthday book, because they all knew he was a creep, and it is super gross. And not just the Trump thing, but like all the other letters are like super creepy and gross.
So I was curious to hear Chris's take on the shutdown, because the Democrats are going to be the ones deciding on this, candidly. And so I agree with them that we're likely going to be a shutdown. I believe also the administration is going to just effectively blow through the shutdown and, or, just do what they do. And I think it's going to be then a shouting match. I don't think that anyone can shout louder than Donald Trump. If they exist, I haven't met them yet, so we'll see how that goes. And then on Epstein, the allegations of what he did and the trial and his being found guilty. I mean, it's just abhorrent. And there is the only people in society that we absolutely have to, and as a collective, we have a responsibility of protecting our children. And it's absolutely horribly insane. And I'm not going to be apologist for anything that he did or anything that he said. I would say it's just curious that having a Democratic Party spend 4 years indicting Trump on 15 different times, that if they had something on him on Epstein, it's interesting why they wouldn't have indicted him on that as well. I mean,
Chris, on the shutdown,
they control the Department of Justice. President Biden was in control of all levers of government. And I'm not defending anybody on this. I just would say that there has been no federal indictments on Jeffrey Epstein, except for Jeffrey and his accomplice. And that may be a travesty of justice. I don't know, but I can tell you, both the Republican and Democratic Department of Justice have seen the same evidence and have yielded no additional indictments.
Chris, can I just ask on the shutdown, because this would be on your side of the aisle. Do you think that Thune would kill the legislative filibuster to get the appropriations through, or no? You think that's sacrosanct still?
Yep. There's if that happens, it'll be a Democrat that does it. It will not be done in a Republican. It will not be done. Nor will the blue slip policy change.
That's great. That's good. Government can continue to function. That's good. I like that. Okay. So we have some questions. So we are very concerned about the ban on funding supporting any nucleic acid-based therapy. The government has chosen to throw the baby out with the bathwater by demonizing all nucleic acid-based therapeutic innovation. Is Health and Human Services or the administration working on better defining what fits into that banned bucket of technology? It's a very specific question, so I'm not sure if you have answer.
I don't want to take it that one. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I can tell you that there are lots of different scientific uh, committees that work with all different dimensions of HHS, including CMS. You know, I would be very surprised if in any of those, in most of those conversations, all things are discussed. I don't know how that process can, ultimately gets decided. My guess would be, the politicals make the decision. And so I just don't have transparency into that conversation of that process.
Yeah, and speaking as someone in Boston, I mean, biotech and medical funding is a huge deal here. And I think what we see from the people I talk to is absolute uncertainty of when grants are going to get killed, where they're not going to get killed. We're seeing junior researchers applying for jobs in Europe. And I know the biotech companies are very worried about this because mRNA technology is one of the most amazing, miraculous things. I just thought today it's Hodgkin's disease might be reduced by 75% with mRNA technology. So we don't know.
With breast cancer, there's a
Yeah.
vaccine being developed now with mRNA. Yeah, you're right. It's cutting off a lot.
So
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of lobbying money to get it back on, and there are going to be some court cases, but I think no one really knows. And if you're a postdoc, my fear, just as someone who lives in Boston and cares about our biotech sector, my fear are junior researchers going to Europe and the next wave of companies there. But that wouldn't be seen today. That would be seen over the next 5 years.
Yep. Okay, so I have a fun question, all right? So besides either JD Vance or Gavin Newsom possibly running in 2028, who are the 2 to 3 additional names that are coming to the forefront to take on the presidential role? So let's talk about campaign. What do we think? Any ideas?
I mean, Marco Rubio will definitely be in the mix on our side, Republican side. I think that I can't really think there'll be some very qualified women running on the Republican side as well. This is going to run contrary to popular opinion on this, probably, and conventional wisdom. I don't believe that Trump is the person that's going to successfully replace Trump is not going to be Trump-esque. It's just because he's one of one. There's no one that's involved in presidential politics. No one's involved in congressionals. No one's involved in the gubernatorials that acts like Trump has been successful. They're just so like they're and so there may be the policies may be taken up by the party and maintained, but the style is going to be very, very different. And so I think you're going to have, like always, you're going to have some governors running, maybe some, ambitious members of Congress, certainly a couple of senators, and former senators, one being Secretary of State. But I think, we're just, as always, and it's always a fun game, but there is, at this time, no one knew who Barack Obama was. I mean, didn't even know he existed. Americans, people didn't even know existed at this time and during his run for president.
Yeah, and I think on the Democratic side, there's definitely the current crop of frontrunners, which are Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, Pritzker, governor of Illinois. I think they're going to be there. They're going to be in the early states. Is there going to be someone like Bernie Sanders in 2016, Obama in 2008, who came out of they weren't in the polling 3.5 years before, and then they started to emerge. I don't know. AOC has been mentioned, but I don't think she would win a primary out of fears of electability. I think it's more likely she would go after the New York Senate seat. So there's always a chance for members of Congress. There's always a chance for senators. What I think we're going to see is someone who is outside of DC and outside of the kind of Washington mindset, because the previous candidates were Hillary Clinton, who had been a national figure since 1992, Joe Biden, who had been a national figure since 1972, I think. He was elected when Nixon was still there, and then would have been Biden, but then it kind of went to Harris, almost by default. And so I think what we're going to see, if I had to put money on it, I would say Pritzker. But I think there's also a good chance that it's kind of a no-name governor like a Bill Clinton, or a member of Congress who's not seen to be of Congress, like maybe even a Marie Gluesenkamp Perez out of Washington State that can run that outsider lane. I'm going to shake everything up, and that's to me what I'm looking at is what's the lane that they're going in, and is there someone who can very quickly consolidate what I think is the most compelling lane, which is the outsider lane. And if you can get that, you got a good chance. Otherwise, I mean, who knows? Gavin Newsom. I don't think Gavin Newsom has it. I think he's, as the kids would say, I think he's too thirsty.
Mm. Well, since we're talking about politics, let's stick with that. So we saw that surprise in Iowa. The legislator who won a seat that had been won by Trump, I think it was 10 or 11 points. And now we've got Virginia heating up. Like, what do we think about some of the state stuff going on and what's going on there? And how does that show what maybe could happen next year? Any
Well,
thoughts?
this is the easy answer is that the marginal these often point to the environment next year. It's not a direct correlation, but generally speaking, Chris Christie won in New Jersey in 2009 before the Tea Party wave. There are some qualifications. New Jersey is probably going to be closer than it will be in the midterms, just because the Democratic candidate seems to be underperforming there. Just as a candidate, is a little underwhelming. Um, you may see some real overperformance in some like really low turnout elections for the Democrats because the coalitions have shifted and Democrats have the more high turnout voters. So it's one of those where they can give you a sense of what's going to happen next year. But I still think if there's one data point you look at, it's the generic congressional ballot. That and then in terms of who gets the nominations in the swing states or in the competitive states, is there a bit of a candidate edge there? So like in North Carolina, there's a real candidate edge for the Democratic candidate because he was the former governor. He's still pretty popular. So it doesn't mean he'll win, but if you kind of say, here's the baseline partisan split, you give like an extra 2 points to the Democrat, or in another state, it might be an extra 2 points to the Republican.
Yeah, politics is amazing. I actually do. I have a crazy question for both of you, Liz, you and Chris. Chris, more importantly though, like when Mondami wins the New York mayor's race, do you think that he's going to become the face of the Democratic Party? And if so, what does that? How does that factor in, or how does his being mayor factor in to the elections next year?
I think this is one of those things that is the New York mayor is always like over indexed because the media is in New York. Eric Adams was supposed to be like the next face of the Democratic Party when he won, or not the next face, but a face. Mamdani is always obviously very different. Um, I think he will get a lot of attention the same way that AOC got attention in 2019 as the new thing. But the mayor is different because the mayor is a lot more focused on municipal stuff. So if I had to guess, I would say he will get attention. He will be talked about, but he will probably stay away from national media in his first year of office, and he's going to focus on just like New York stuff. So he'll be very big in New York. I think what it means for nationally is if he's seen as a success or failure, what does that do for the suburban congressional districts? Because one of the Nancy Pelosi still blames Kathy Hochul for losing her the House in 2022 because Hochul underperformed so badly that Democrats lost a number of suburban tri-state seats. So if Mondani is, if he does a series of gaffes, a series of errors, if crime spikes and it seems like he's a problem, you could see fear, on Long Island in the Hudson Valley. But I think uh, everything that comes out of New York in the national media has to be like scaled down for its actual impact, just because every reporter wants to go to a press conference where they don't have to actually get on a plane.
All right, what do you think, Chris Campbell?
On what issue? I know we have like we're at 0 times. Like what on the overall politics or
Yeah. Final word on politics in the elections.
I think it's gonna be close. I think gerrymandering is going to play a part in this, and on both sides. And I think that it's going to be again, it's going to be really, really close. I think that it's as a Republican, you probably expect me to say this, but but I honestly say that I'd probably rather be a Republican than a Democrat. I'd say I'd rather be Speaker Johnson than Hakeem Jeffries going in. I think that probably again close, but I think that Johnson probably remains Speaker.
All right, Chris Oates, do you have a prediction?
Democrats take the House and they pick up a seat or two in the Senate, but they don't take the Senate majority.
All right, you heard their predictions. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for dialing in. I really enjoyed today's discussion. We will send out the recording and join us again for our next quarterly session. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.